This story is titled, My Wife Chose a Lover Over Our Marriage, Not Knowing About My Secret $1 million Fortune, and Now She's Paying the Price. Hey everyone, it all started on what should have been just another ordinary Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting in my office, completely absorbed in finalizing a multi-million-dollar deal that had been consuming my attention for weeks. The stakes were high, and as a successful businessman, I've learned that these moments of focus can make or break your career. My phone had been buzzing persistently, but I ignored it at first. When you're in the zone with work like that, distractions can derail your entire thought process. After a while, I glanced over to see 3 missed calls from an unknown number. I dismissed it, assuming it was probably just another desperate sales representative trying to pitch me something I didn't need. These calls were a regular nuisance in my position. When the 4th call came in, I finally decided to answer it. Whoever this was clearly wasn't going to give up, and it might be faster to just deal with it now rather than have my concentration broken repeatedly. Before I could even say hello, an angry, unfamiliar male voice started yelling through the speaker. You better tell Evelyn to stop playing games with me, man, or this is going to end badly. The words hit me like a physical blow. Evelyn, my wife of 25 years. I felt myself freeze instantly as a wave of heat rose in my chest. Who the hell is this? I demanded, my voice suddenly sharp and cold. There was a telling silence on the other end of the line. Whoever this man was, he clearly realized he had made a serious mistake. After a moment, he spoke again, his tone markedly different. Wait, this isn't Blake? No, it's not, I responded, my grip tightening on the phone. And I'd like to know who Blake is and why you're calling about my wife. Another pause followed, longer this time and more calculated. I could almost hear him thinking through his options. Finally, he simply said, I think I've said enough, and hung up. My pulse was racing, but not in the way you might expect. I wasn't some emotional wreck ready to explode in a fit of jealous rage. Instead, my mind became razor sharp, instantly analyzing what had just happened. This is what I do best in business. Reading between the lines, seeing the patterns that others miss. And right now, every instinct was telling me that something very wrong was happening in my marriage. But after 25 years together, I wasn't about to start throwing accusations based on one strange phone call. That's not how I operate. I handle everything in my life methodically, including personal crises. If there was a problem with Evelyn, I would approach it the same way I approach problems in business, with strategy, patience, and careful planning. I grabbed my jacket, told my assistant I had a family emergency, and drove straight home. The house was quiet when I arrived. Evelyn wasn't home yet. Perfect. This would give me some time to do a bit of reconnaissance without having to explain myself or deal with immediate confrontation. I hadn't snooped through my wife's personal things in years. It had never seemed necessary before. But this wasn't paranoia driving me now. This was strategy. Something was off, and I needed information before deciding how to proceed. I started with her computer, which she'd left open on her desk. Her emails looked clean, nothing suspicious in her contacts or messages that would immediately raise alarms. But when I checked her calendar, that's where things got interesting. For the past 3 months, every Thursday had blocks of time marked off for various activities, meetings, errands, doctor's appointments. I had never questioned these before. Evelyn had always been organized and independent, managing her own schedule while I focused on my business. But now, looking at the pattern with fresh eyes, I could see something wasn't right. It was always Thursday. Always a 3-hour window. Too consistent. Too convenient. I felt the adrenaline start pumping through my system, but I kept my composure. Jumping to conclusions wouldn't help me understand what was really going on. I grabbed my phone and called Evelyn, making sure my voice sounded perfectly normal. Hey, what time are you getting home? I asked casually. Just finishing up with Madeline, then I'll be home in an hour or so, she replied, sounding completely at ease. Why, is everything okay? Madeline. That name caught my attention immediately. She used to be our neighbor years ago, and Evelyn would occasionally have lunch with her. But we hadn't seen her in forever. She'd moved to another state at least 2 years ago. The lie was so effortless, so practiced, that I knew this wasn't the first time she'd used this excuse. I kept my tone light. Yeah, just wondering if we're still on for dinner. Oh, sure, she responded with that familiar warmth in her voice that I'd always found so comforting. Can't wait. See you soon. As I hung up, my heart was pounding harder. Every lie she told was like another puzzle piece falling into place, forming a picture I wasn't sure I wanted to see clearly. but I needed to know the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it might be. I checked her location using the sharing app we'd set up years ago for safety reasons. We rarely used it anymore, but today it would be my ace in the hole. Just as I suspected, she wasn't anywhere near where Madeline used to live. She wasn't even in that part of town. Instead, she was across the city in some random neighborhood I didn't recognize. I smiled to myself, not because I was happy, but because I was onto something. And when I'm onto something, I don't let go until I've uncovered the full story. That night, dinner was absolutely unbearable. Evelyn walked in exactly 1 hour after our call, looking fresh and energized, as if she'd just spent the day at a spa rather than running errands across town. She kissed my cheek casually as she entered, acting like nothing was wrong. She asked if I wanted takeout for dinner, and I agreed while keeping my face perfectly neutral. I wanted to see if she would slip up, if she would show any sign that revealed the truth behind her perfect act. But no, she played her role flawlessly. I watched her carefully throughout our meal. Light conversation flowed between us like always, discussing mundane topics and daily happenings. You'd never guess that just minutes earlier, I had tracked her location to a sketchy part of town that was nowhere near where she claimed to be. Her ability to maintain this facade was both impressive and disturbing. The game was still on, and I was determined to find out what exactly she was hiding. The next morning, I made my first real move. I have this friend Fletcher, a private investigator who specializes in discretion. He's the kind who can find anything without making a sound or leaving a trace. I'd helped him out of some serious financial trouble years ago, and he's owed me ever since. The time had come to call in that favor. "Fletcher, I need you to follow Evelyn for a while," I said when he answered my call. "Don't ask questions yet. I just need to know where she's going on Thursdays." Fletcher picked up on my tone immediately. He knew me well enough to understand when something was serious. "I'll start next week. You'll know everything by Friday," he promised, not pressing for details. That's what I've always appreciated about him. He gets the job done without unnecessary conversation. The waiting felt endless. I threw myself into work, trying to focus on the multi-million-dollar deal instead of the potential collapse of my marriage. Meanwhile, Evelyn continued to act the same as always. Perfectly composed, affectionate, and seemingly transparent. There was not a single crack in her performance that would give away what she was doing behind my back. Thursday came around faster than I expected. I knew Fletcher would be watching her all day, documenting her every move. I kissed her goodbye in the morning like always, smiling as if nothing was wrong. Hours passed, and I couldn't stop thinking about what Fletcher might find. The afternoon dragged on endlessly until finally my phone buzzed with a text. It was from Fletcher. "Meet me at the park near your house. 6 p.m. we need to talk." I didn't bother responding. From his tone, I already knew it couldn't be good, but I needed to see whatever he'd found for myself. I told my office I had a last-minute meeting and drove straight to the park. Fletcher was there waiting, leaning against his car with a more serious expression than I'd seen in years. I walked directly up to him and skipped the small talk. "Tell me," I said, wanting him to get straight to the point. Fletcher didn't waste time with preamble. "She's seeing someone," he stated flatly. "I followed her this morning. She didn't go anywhere near where she told you she would be. She drove straight to a hotel on the other side of town, met a guy in the parking lot. Got photos." I swallowed hard. I had been prepared for this, had suspected it for days, but hearing it confirmed out loud hit differently. It made it real in a way my suspicions hadn't. Fletcher handed me his phone, and there they were. Photos of Evelyn, smiling without a care in the world, walking with some guy I'd never seen before. He looked younger than me, taller, more athletic, and dressed casually but expensively. In one photo, he was holding the door open for her as they disappeared into the hotel together. I stood there staring at the photos, the silence between me and Fletcher growing heavier by the second. Everything I had suspected was right there in front of me. Undeniable evidence of my wife's betrayal. Even so, I wasn't ready to blow up yet. The anger was there, simmering beneath the surface. But I've never been the type to explode in emotional outbursts. That's not how I operate. "What do you want to do?" Fletcher asked carefully, watching my reaction. I pocketed the phone. Those images now burned into my brain. "Keep following her," I instructed. "I need more. If I confront her now, she'll just lie again. I want to know everything. What he does, what she's thinking, how long this has been going on. I want to see where this leads." Fletcher nodded, his face unreadable. "I'll keep digging. You'll have a full report by the end of next week." We said goodbye and I drove home, my mind racing with possibilities. This wouldn't be a simple confrontation, not by a long shot. Evelyn had crossed a line, violated 25 years of trust, but I wasn't going to tip my hand just yet. She had been playing me for who knows how long, and if she thought she would walk away from this unscathed, she was dead wrong. I needed a plan, a strategy to deal with this betrayal in a way that would leave no doubt about who had the upper hand. That night, Evelyn walked in like nothing had changed. She looked relaxed, humming to herself while cooking dinner. I watched her move around the kitchen, noticing how every gesture now seemed rehearsed, every word sounding like a line from a well-practiced script. It made me sick to think about how well she wore this mask of normalcy. I wondered how many times she had come home after being with him. How many lies she had told straight to my face without even flinching. "Long day?" she asked, setting a plate in front of me with that same smile she'd given me thousands of times before. I forced myself to smile back, keeping my expression neutral. Yeah, just the usual. My voice was steady, giving nothing away. But inside, I was boiling with a cold rage I'd never experienced before. For the next few days, I played the same role, cool, collected, pretending I didn't know what she was up to. But the truth was, every minute I spent in the same room with her, I was quietly planning my next move. Friday finally arrived, and Fletcher called me. His voice was tense, clearly uncomfortable with what he had discovered. "I've got everything," he said. "You're going to want to see this." I didn't waste any time and immediately arranged to meet him again. This time, the envelope he handed me was thick, too thick. "Here's what you asked for," Fletcher said, his expression grim. "It's not just some random fling. This has been going on for months, maybe longer." I took the envelope, feeling the substantial weight of it in my hands. Inside were photos, logs, and detailed notes from Fletcher's investigation. What I discovered was far worse than I had imagined. Evelyn hadn't just been sneaking off for occasional hotel meetings. This was deeper, more established. They had a routine, an entire secret world that existed behind my back. Dinner dates, trips outside the city, weekends she claimed were spent with friends that were actually spent with him instead. The final gut punch came when I realized there was no Blake mentioned in the angry phone call, no Madeline she was supposedly visiting. Evelyn had invented these names, and I had swallowed her lies whole, never questioning her until now. But the biggest revelation came last. Fletcher handed me a final piece of paper, his face darkening. "You might want to sit down for this part," he warned. I unfolded the paper slowly, my heart dropping with each line I read. The man she was with wasn't just some random guy she'd met at a social event or through mutual friends. He was someone connected to me, a former client I had worked with years ago, a man who had failed in business and lost a huge deal to me. Apparently, he had found a way to win something back, even if it wasn't in the business world. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Evelyn wasn't just having an affair. This was personal. The betrayal cut deeper, knowing there might be an element of revenge involved. I wasn't going to let this slide. My own revenge was coming, and it was going to be spectacular. That night after meeting Fletcher, I barely slept. My mind raced through possibilities, analyzing every angle. I couldn't just confront her. Not yet. Evelyn had played her game for months, maybe years, without breaking a sweat. If I wanted to take her down, I couldn't make a single misstep. This required the same precision and strategic thinking that had made me successful in business. By the next morning, everything clicked into place. I had been going about this the wrong way, thinking about the affair as merely an emotional betrayal. But this was calculated, a deliberate move, perhaps even targeted. It wasn't just about lust or boredom that drove her to him. There was a deeper motive. Evelyn isn't stupid, and neither am I. I had to be careful. If she smelled blood in the water, she would get defensive and lie her way out like she always did. No, I needed her to think she was winning, to feel secure in her deception while I worked behind the scenes. I spent the weekend studying Fletcher's report, going over every detail meticulously. The man, let's call him Adrian, had been lurking in the shadows of my life for years, nursing a grudge after our failed business deal. I'd forgotten about him and moved on, never giving him another thought. But clearly, he had kept tabs on me and somehow wormed his way into Evelyn's life. Whether it started as a genuine attraction or as part of some twisted vendetta, I didn't care anymore. What mattered was the betrayal, not just as a husband, but as a partner, someone I trusted to have my back through thick and thin. I couldn't just walk away. No, I had something far more elaborate in mind. Monday morning, while Evelyn was at her yoga class, a nice cover for another rendezvous, I made a few calls. The first was to my lawyer. I needed to get my assets in order, but not in the way she might expect. You see, what Evelyn didn't know was that my business had exploded in value over the past 2 years. It was now worth close to $10 million. I had kept this information close to my chest. We lived comfortably, but hadn't flaunted the real numbers. I always believed in protecting for the future, and it turns out I was right to keep my cards hidden. My lawyer and I had an agreement in place by that afternoon. Evelyn had no legal claim to my business. Everything had been arranged before our marriage. She couldn't touch it if she tried. But she didn't even know how much there was to reach for. And I intended to keep it that way, at least for now. My next call was to Fletcher. I told him to keep following Adrian. I wanted to know everything: his job, his finances, his routines, what his life looked like behind the scenes. If this guy thought he was clever, he was about to find out what real strategy looked like when implemented by a master. For the rest of the week, I played my role perfectly. I went to work, smiled when I got home, and let Evelyn go about her business like nothing had changed. But in the background, I was tightening the screws. Thanks to Fletcher, I knew where she went, who she saw, how long she stayed with him. I knew Adrian's every move, down to when he stopped for gas and what time he walked his dog. I had become a silent observer to their little affair, gathering information and planning my counterattack. By Friday, I was ready. Evelyn had her usual Thursday girls' night out planned. This time, I didn't just wait for her return. I had Fletcher keep a closer eye on Adrian. Sure enough, at 9 p.m., Evelyn's car pulled up to the same hotel as always. It was always the same routine. Park out of sight, slip inside, spend a few hours with him, then come home all smiles. But tonight, she wasn't just coming home to an oblivious husband. Tonight was the beginning of the end. I waited until midnight, until she was back in bed pretending nothing had happened, before I made my first move. The next morning, Evelyn woke up to her phone buzzing incessantly. I was already up, sipping coffee in the kitchen, waiting for her to check her messages. I watched her face carefully as she read them. They were messages from Adrian, but not the kind she was used to receiving. "Evelyn, we have a problem. Call me ASAP. You need to talk to your husband. He's on to something. Things are getting complicated." Her eyes widened as she read each message, and I could see panic beginning to set in. She sat up quickly, throwing the covers off, staring at her phone like it had just exploded in her hands. She thought she had everything under control, but her grip on her perfect little double life was slipping fast. I walked into the bedroom, coffee mug in hand, and leaned against the doorframe. I could see the wheels turning in her head, her mind scrambling to figure out how to fix this new problem. She looked up at me and forced a smile. One of those fake, tight-lipped ones that screamed, "I'm hiding something." "Morning," she said, her voice too cheerful for someone who had just received a series of distressing messages. "What's the plan for today?" I raised an eyebrow, pretending not to notice her phone clutched tightly in her hand. "I thought we'd do something different today," I suggested casually. "Take a drive, maybe stop by some old spots we haven't visited in a while. What do you think?" Evelyn's eyes flickered with confusion, but she nodded quickly, still glancing at her phone as if Adrian's messages would vanish if she looked away long enough. "Sure, sounds good," she agreed. "Let me just freshen up." She practically bolted to the bathroom, her phone glued to her palm, probably trying to figure out how to respond to Adrian without tipping me off. Little did she know, I had already tipped him off. The night before, I had a little chat with Adrian myself. Nothing aggressive, nothing out of line, just enough to make him realize that I knew enough to make him nervous, to send him spiraling. And it had worked perfectly. Evelyn emerged from the bathroom 10 minutes later, looking more composed, but with visible cracks starting to show in her facade. She still thought she was in control, that she could fix whatever was going wrong. She had no idea how deep she was already in. As we drove out of town, I casually mentioned that I had been thinking about our future, our financial future. Evelyn immediately perked up, her attention shifting from her phone to me. I could see her interest peaking. She didn't know about the $10 million, but the moment I started talking about money, she was hooked. "What do you mean?" she asked, trying to sound innocent. I kept my tone light. "I've been thinking we've worked hard for years. It might be time to start planning what comes next. Retirement, traveling, maybe some new investments." Evelyn smiled, but I could see something calculating in her eyes. She didn't know exactly how much I had, but soon she was going to think she knew. And that's when the real fun would begin. Evelyn had always been good at hiding her intentions. But when it came to money, she couldn't mask her excitement. I could see her eyes light up in a way I hadn't seen in years. I knew she was hooked. I kept talking, feeding her just enough information to reel her in. I told her the business was doing pretty well, that I'd been making some smart investments with a lot of potential for growth. She played her part perfectly, feigning mild curiosity while trying not to show how desperate she was to know the real numbers. "I'm glad to hear things are going well," she said, her voice sweet but her eyes betraying her. "I've been thinking about our future too. We've been working so hard. It would be nice to enjoy the fruits of it, don't you think?" I had to hold back a laugh. She had no idea what was coming. "Exactly," I nodded. "I think we're at a point where we can really start thinking about what's next. In fact, I've been looking into a few properties out of state, something a little more remote. Maybe even a vacation home. You'd like that, wouldn't you?" Her reaction was immediate. "Vacation home?" She tried to sound casual but failed to hide her interest. "That sounds amazing. Where were you thinking?" "Somewhere peaceful," I replied, glancing at her to see how far I could push it. "Maybe in the mountains. A quiet place where we could just get away. No distractions, no one to bother us." Her smile faltered for a split second, but she quickly recovered. I could almost see her calculating the implications, wondering if I was dropping hints about her affair. But she played along like the seasoned actress she was. "That sounds perfect," she said, her voice a little too bright. "You know, after all these years, we deserve something like that. I've always wanted a place to escape to." Escape. She had no idea how fitting that word was. The entire time we talked, I kept thinking about Adrian, how he was probably freaking out after my subtle messages, scrambling to figure out what I knew and what Evelyn hadn't told him. I wanted him nervous. I wanted him to slip up just like she would. Soon enough, they'd both be way over their heads. Later that night, while Evelyn was in the shower, more likely texting Adrian under the guise of a self-care routine, I sat down and put the final piece of my plan in motion. First, I contacted my lawyer again, making sure all my assets were safely locked away, completely untouchable no matter what Evelyn might try to do. The money was hidden, the business protected by ironclad agreements. She wasn't getting a single penny, but I wanted her to think there was a fortune just waiting for her greedy hands. I had to make the bait irresistible. I called Fletcher next. "I need you to start keeping an eye on Evelyn's accounts," I instructed. "Specifically, any big transactions. If she's planning to make a move, she'll start moving money around soon. When she does, I want to know." Fletcher agreed without hesitation. "Shouldn't take long if she's planning something," he assured me. I hung up, feeling a grim satisfaction settle in my chest. The wheels were turning. Evelyn had no clue she was walking straight into a trap. The idea of her plotting with Adrian behind my back, thinking she was going to walk away with half of everything I'd built, made the irony even sweeter. Over the next few days, I watched Evelyn more closely than ever. She was careful, texting only when she thought I wasn't looking, keeping her phone face down on the counter, leaving the room to take calls. She'd smile at me across the table with that same fake warmth in her eyes, and I'd smile back, playing the part of the oblivious, loving husband to perfection. Then came Thursday, her usual day for the affair. Evelyn slipped out of the house like always, wearing one of her girls' night out outfits that was a little too fancy for just dinner with friends. I didn't say anything, just kissed her goodbye and told her to have fun. I waited for her to leave, watching from the window as her car disappeared down the street. The moment the door closed behind her, I grabbed my keys and followed her. This time, I didn't need Fletcher's help. I wanted to see it myself. I trailed her from a distance, watching as she drove across town completely unaware that I was right behind her. My heart was pounding, but not from anger. Not yet, anyway. This was strategy. Every step of the way, I was in control. She pulled into the same hotel as always, her routine never changing. It was almost insulting how little she bothered to cover her tracks, thinking I was too clueless to catch on. I parked a block away, close enough to see, but far enough not to be noticed. Sure enough, Adrian showed up minutes later and walked into the hotel with the same smug confidence I imagined he had when he stole my business deal years ago. But tonight, he wasn't the one in control. I waited for what felt like hours, though it was probably closer to 30 minutes. Then, just as expected, Evelyn came back out alone. I didn't follow her this time. I knew where she was headed. But Adrian, he wasn't going anywhere yet. I pulled my car around to the front of the hotel, parked, and walked inside. The receptionist glanced up as I entered, but I ignored her. I already knew where Adrian was. Thanks to Fletcher's careful work, room 312. I took the elevator up, my heart pounding in my chest. But I wasn't nervous, and this wasn't rage or impulse driving me. It was pure, cold calculation. The door to room 312 stood before me like an invitation. I raised my hand and knocked once, twice, then waited. The door opened a crack, and Adrian stood there, confusion flashing across his face. He didn't recognize me immediately, but then realization hit him, and the color drained from his face. "Evening, Adrian," I said calmly, my voice steady and controlled. "We need to talk." Adrian stood frozen in the doorway, his eyes wide like a deer caught in headlights. This was the first time we'd come face to face since all this began, and I could see panic slowly settling in as he realized who I was. He swallowed hard, gripping the door handle tighter. Can I help you?" His voice wavered, not at all like the confident man who had been sneaking around behind my back for months. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. "Help me? Not quite. But I think it's time you and I had a conversation, don't you?" Adrian hesitated, his eyes flickering down the hallway as if planning to make a run for it, but he knew better. There was nowhere to go. "Look, I don't want any trouble," he began nervously. "If this is about— Oh, this is absolutely about Evelyn," I cut him off, stepping forward. He had no choice. Let me in or make a scene. He stepped back and opened the door wider, clearly unsure what was about to happen. The room was small and smelled like cheap cologne and stale air conditioning. The bed was still unmade, and Evelyn's purse was sitting casually on the nightstand. The sight made my stomach turn, but I pushed the feeling down. This wasn't the time to get emotional. This was business. Adrian closed the door behind me, awkwardly shuffling his feet. "Look, man, I didn't know," he stammered. I didn't plan for this to happen. It just did." I raised an eyebrow at him. "Didn't plan for it? That's interesting, considering you've been meeting my wife in secret for months. That seems pretty planned to me, Adrian. Or am I missing something?" He opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. He knew he was screwed and was now scrambling for an exit that didn't exist. I could see him calculating his next move, probably the same way he did when he tried to steal that deal from me years ago. But this time, he wasn't the one in control. I sat down in the cheap hotel chair, making myself comfortable while he stood there, awkward and restless. "Here's the thing, Adrian," I said, keeping my tone calm but firm. "You made a mistake. A big one. And now you've got a problem. Because I know everything." He flinched at the word, everything, his eyes darting to the door again as if trying to figure out how far he'd have to run to escape. But I wasn't done yet, not even close. "You thought this was just about the affair, didn't you?" I continued, watching his face carefully. "That you could sweep in, get Evelyn on your side, and walk away with the spoils. What was your plan? Convince her to leave me, then help her claim half of what I've built? Were you hoping to get a nice payout from my fortune?" Adrian blinked, clearly caught off guard that I knew so much. He stammered, I don't know what you're talking about. It wasn't about that. Evelyn said you guys were done, that you didn't care anymore." I chuckled darkly and shook my head. "Evelyn said a lot of things, didn't she? But let me fill you in on something important. You see, Evelyn has no idea how much I'm actually worth. You thought you were playing me, but the truth is, I've been watching both of you. And here's the kicker, she's not getting a dime." Adrian's face turned pale. I could see the gears turning in his head as he tried to piece together how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. I leaned in slightly, my voice low but sharp. "You tried to outsmart me, but you didn't even have the full picture. Evelyn's not entitled to my business. It's ironclad, locked down. She can try to take whatever she wants, but the millions she's dreaming of? She'll never see it. And neither will you." Adrian swallowed hard, his confidence evaporating by the second. "Look, man, Evelyn didn't tell me anything about money. I didn't even know." I cut him off again, standing up to make sure I towered over him. "I don't care what she told you. What matters now is how this ends. You thought you could slip into my life, take what wasn't yours, and walk away clean. But here's the thing. You're not walking away from this." Adrian's eyes widened as he took a step back, bumping into the nightstand behind him. "What do you want?" His voice was small now, with no trace of the arrogance he probably had when he first met Evelyn. I let silence hang in the air for a moment before speaking again, my voice cold and calculated. "What I want is for you to disappear. Walk away. Leave Evelyn in the mess she's made. Don't look back. You've already lost. The best thing you can do for yourself is cut your losses and get out before things get worse. Adrian's mouth opened and closed as he tried to find words, unable to string a sentence together. He looked like a man who had just heard his life was over, which, in many ways, it was. "Here's what's going to happen," I continued, stepping even closer. "You're going to end whatever this is with Evelyn. No more meetings, no more secret texts, nothing. You're going to tell her it's over. You're going to disappear from both our lives. If I see you again, if you even think about coming near her or me, I will ruin you, financially, professionally, personally. You've already lost once to me. Don't make me do it again." Adrian stared at me, his face a mixture of fear and disbelief. He nodded slowly, as if his body was responding before his brain could catch up. "Okay," he muttered. I'll end it. I'll walk away." I smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. "Good. Because if you don't, trust me when I say, next time we meet, it won't just be a conversation." With that, I turned and walked out, leaving Adrian standing there in stunned silence. The door clicked shut behind me, and I felt a surge of satisfaction rise in my chest. He was done, shaken to his core, fully aware of the position he had put himself in. But Evelyn, she was next. I wasn't finished yet. Adrian was only the beginning. I got back in my car and sat there for a moment, thinking about how to proceed with Evelyn. I had all the evidence I needed, but I wanted to wait for the perfect moment. Not in some cheap hotel, not in the middle of an emotional breakdown. No, I wanted her to feel the full weight of her decisions when that moment came. And when it did, I'd be ready. This was the calm before the storm, the final quiet before everything in her life came crashing down. The next few days felt like walking through a minefield, but I was in control. I moved carefully, watching Evelyn closely, waiting for her to make the next move. I knew she'd be rattled after Adrian told her it was over, and I was eager to see how she'd react. The beauty of it was that she didn't know I had orchestrated the whole thing. She thought the walls were closing in for some other reason entirely. By Wednesday, her behavior started to shift. She was jumpy, more cautious. When she thought I wasn't looking, she'd glance at her phone, but there were no longer those long, secretive texting sessions. She wasn't slipping out of the room to make hushed phone calls like before. Something had definitely changed, but she wasn't ready to crack. Not yet. That evening at the dinner table, I noticed she was unusually quiet. Her eyes were distant, and our usual small talk was missing. She was thinking, no, scheming, trying to figure out how to salvage whatever mess she had gotten herself into. "Everything okay?" I asked, keeping my tone light, my fork hovering over my plate. I wanted to see how far she would go to keep up the act. She looked up, startled, as if I had interrupted a deep internal monologue. "Yeah, just a lot on my mind lately," she said, forcing a smile that barely reached her eyes. "Work's been stressful." Work. That was rich. She hadn't mentioned work being stressful in months, maybe even years. But I let it slide, nodding as if I cared while she fidgeted with her food, clearly too distracted to eat. Later that night, I sat on the couch, casually flipping through channels, waiting for her to make a move. She wandered around the house restlessly, as if trying to decide whether to come clean or hold on to her lie a little longer. Finally, she sat down next to me, the air between us thick with tension. "I've been thinking," she started, her voice softer than usual, "about us, about the future." Here it was, the setup. I didn't respond right away, letting her sit in silence a moment longer before turning to her, pretending to be curious. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, and I could almost see the gears turning as she carefully chose her words. I feel like we've been growing apart lately. You've been so focused on work, and I've been, well, trying to figure things out. Trying to figure things out. That was one way to put it. I could feel anger bubbling up inside me, but I kept my expression neutral, letting her dig herself deeper. "I don't know," she continued, wringing her hands together as if trying to convince herself as much as me. "Maybe we've just been so busy, so distracted by everything else, that we haven't really focused on us. I was thinking maybe we should take a break, to clear our heads. Figure out what we really want." The audacity of it almost made me laugh. She was trying to turn the whole thing on me, as if her affair wasn't the root cause of our problems. As if we needed a break because I'd been distracted by work, not because she'd been sneaking around behind my back for months. But I wasn't going to bite. Not yet. "A break?" I raised an eyebrow, playing along. "What kind of break are you thinking about?" Her face softened, relieved that I hadn't pushed back. She must have thought I was buying into her story. "Just some time apart," she explained. "You could focus on work and I could, figure things out for myself. I think it might help us both get some clarity. I leaned back, pretending to consider it. So, separation? She flinched at the word, as if she hadn't meant to go that far. No, not separation. She backpedaled quickly. Just some time to clear our heads. That's all. I think it could be good for us. I nodded slowly, my mind already racing with how I could use this against her. She thought she could control the narrative, but she was playing right into my hands. Maybe you're right, I said thoughtfully. Some time apart might be good. I have been working a lot, and if you need space, I don't want to stand in your way. Her eyes widened slightly. She probably wasn't expecting me to agree so easily, but she masked her surprise with a weak smile. Yeah, I think it'll give us both some perspective. I stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the darkened street. I let the silence hang for a few seconds longer, building tension before I spoke again. You know, I began, turning back to face her. There's something I've been meaning to tell you too. Evelyn's eyes snapped to mine, her body tensing. She wasn't ready for this. I walked back to the couch slowly, deliberately, keeping my tone calm and measured. You remember how we talked about our financial future a few weeks ago? Well, I've been thinking about it a lot. I've been thinking about how much I've worked for, and how important it is to protect what's mine. You know, just in case something unexpected happens. Her face paled slightly, her hands clenching in her lap. She had no idea where this was going, but she could feel it. Something was coming. I leaned in, my voice low but steady. You see, Evelyn, I've been very careful with our finances. Everything we have is protected. The business, the assets, everything. And I made sure that nothing can touch it. Not even if you decided to leave. I watched her face as realization started to dawn. She tried to keep her composure, but I could see panic rising behind her eyes. What are you saying? She asked, her voice shaky. I'm saying that no matter what happens, Evelyn, you're not getting anything. The house, the business, all the money you thought you'd walk away with? I smiled, but it was cold, devoid of warmth. It's mine. You've been playing a dangerous game, and you've already lost. Her mouth opened and then closed again, as if she couldn't find the words. For the first time, I saw her mask crack completely. The perfect, composed Evelyn was gone, and in her place was a woman scrambling to understand how everything had fallen apart so quickly. You knew? She whispered, her voice barely audible. Oh, I knew, I said, standing up again, towering over her. I've known for weeks. The late nights, the secret texts, the hotel visits. I know all of it. And so does Adrian. At the mention of his name, her face twisted in shock. Adrian? I nodded slowly. Yeah, I paid him a visit. He's done, Evelyn. He walked away. Just like you're about to. Tears welled up in her eyes, and for a moment, I thought she might actually try to apologize, try to claw her way back. But then, in a split second, her expression shifted, hardening into something I hadn't seen before. She wasn't going to beg or grovel. No, she was going to fight back. You think you can just do this to me? She hissed, standing up and glaring at me with venom in her voice. You think you can just throw me out after everything we've been through? After all the years I've put into this marriage? I laughed bitterly. What marriage? The one you've been lying your way through for months? Don't act like the victim, Evelyn. You made your choice. She took a step closer, her eyes burning with rage. I'll get a lawyer. I'll take you for everything you've got. You can't just cut me out like this. I'll ruin you. You've already lost, I countered calmly. Lawyers won't save you. Everything is locked down. You won't even see a fraction of what you think you deserve. You ruined yourself the moment you decided to betray me. The silence that followed was deafening. For a moment, we just stood there, staring at each other. Two people who had once built a life together, now on the verge of tearing it apart. Finally, she spoke, her voice quiet but filled with malice. You'll regret this. I shook my head, my voice calm and firm. No, Evelyn, you will. The next morning, Evelyn was gone. She had packed a small bag and left a note on the counter. It was short and to the point. No apologies, just pure venom. You're going to regret this. This isn't over. I smiled to myself. The fight was exactly what I had expected. Evelyn wasn't the kind to slink away quietly. She was a strategist just like me, but she didn't realize that I'd already dismantled her entire plan while she was still trying to figure out where the pieces went. I took the note, crumpled it in my fist, and tossed it into the trash. Let her try. She could go ahead and threaten all she wanted. She didn't understand that the game was already over. She had lost. But knowing her, She would keep fighting until the bitter end, convinced there was still a way to win. Over the next few days, things moved quickly. My lawyer finalized all the paperwork, ensuring everything I had built remained locked down tight. Evelyn could hire the best attorney in the state, but it wouldn't matter. There were no loopholes, no weak points for her to exploit. She could try to take me for everything, but all she'd find was a locked safe with no combination. Meanwhile, Fletcher kept an eye on Evelyn. She wasn't hiding. In fact, she made it easy. She moved in with her friend Madeline, one of her longtime socialite buddies who seemed more than happy to give her a place to stay while she figured things out. Fletcher confirmed that Madeline's place was where Evelyn had holed up, probably regrouping and trying to come up with her next move. What she didn't realize was that I already had my next move planned. The day after she left, I took a drive across town. A quiet drive, the kind you take when you're thinking about everything except the road. I arrived at my lawyer's office a little before noon. I hadn't needed to come in person, but there was something satisfying about being there, about watching the last few details come together in real time. I stepped into the conference room, where my lawyer, Thorne, greeted me with a firm handshake. "Everything's in place," he said, his expression professional but with a hint of satisfaction. He had been with me from the beginning, back when my business was just a fledgling idea. Now he was seeing the final chapter of Evelyn's influence unfold. "Good," I replied, sitting down across from him. "Let's make it airtight." Thorne pushed a stack of papers across the table. "Already done. The business is fully secured. She can contest it, but it won't go anywhere. As for the house, if she wants to fight for it, she'll have a hell of a time. The equity is in your name, and since you've already moved most liquid assets out of joint accounts, there's nothing left for her to take." I glanced at the paperwork, skimming through the key points. Everything was exactly as it should be. Evelyn had no claim. She could scream, cry, and try to rally an army of lawyers, but in the end, she'd walk away with nothing but a few personal items and the bitter taste of defeat. "She's going to go ballistic," I said, leaning back in my chair. Thorne nodded, a small smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. "Let her. The more noise she makes, the more she exposes herself. Legally speaking, she doesn't have a leg to stand on. It was done. The final nail in the coffin of what was once our life together. There was no turning back now. When I got home that evening, the house felt different. Not empty exactly, but quiet in a way that was unsettling. Evelyn's presence, her energy, had all been stripped away. I sat in the living room, staring at the walls, letting the silence wrap around me like a blanket. Part of me felt relief, freedom even, but another part felt something darker, something more complex. This wasn't how I had ever imagined life would turn out. After 27 years of marriage, I wasn't just losing a wife. I was losing a partner, a co-conspirator, someone who had once been in step with me. Now that person had become my enemy. But I couldn't dwell on that. This was the life I had chosen now. Evelyn had made her choices, and I had made mine. It was time to move on. The next morning, things started to unravel for her faster than I had expected. It began with a phone call. I was sipping my morning coffee when my phone buzzed. It was Fletcher, his voice urgent but not panicked. "I've been keeping tabs on Evelyn like you asked," he reported, "and something interesting just came up. You're not going to believe this." "Go on," I said, already intrigued. "She's been trying to reach Adrian, but he's not responding. In fact, he seems to have vanished. I did some digging, and it turns out Adrian's been in more financial trouble than we realized. He skipped town, probably ran out of cash, maybe hiding from creditors. Either way, he's left Evelyn high and dry." I couldn't help but laugh. The poetic justice was too perfect. Evelyn's supposed knight in shining armor had bolted the moment things got difficult. She thought she had an escape route, a backup plan, but instead, she was stranded all alone. "Serves her right," I said, setting down my coffee. "Let her see what it feels like to be abandoned." But Fletcher wasn't done. "There's more. I don't know how, but Madeline, Evelyn's friend, is in on it too. She's been pushing Evelyn to file for divorce, but it seems like they were both banking on Adrian helping them out financially. With him gone, their plan is falling apart. They're scrambling." I leaned back in my chair, a slow grin spreading across my face. This was better than I could have imagined. Evelyn was losing control. The people she thought would support her were turning out to be just as unreliable as she was. I hung up the phone and sat there for a moment, letting it all sink in. The satisfaction of watching her life crumble was real, but so was the finality of it all. Evelyn had chosen this path, and now she was paying the price. I had taken everything she thought she could count on, and in return, She was left with nothing but the wreckage of her own decisions. 2 days later, I got the call I had been waiting for. It was Evelyn. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice strained, barely holding it together. I didn't reply right away. I let the silence stretch between us, letting her feel the weight of what she was asking. Then finally, I spoke. "Sure," I said, my voice calm and steady, "but I'm not sure there's much left to say." We agreed to meet at the house. She didn't have many options left, and she knew it. When she arrived, I was already waiting in the living room, a glass of whiskey in my hand. She walked in looking tired and worn down. Nothing like the confident, manipulative woman I had confronted weeks ago. Now she was desperate. She sat down across from me, her eyes searching mine for something, anything that would give her an advantage. But there was nothing left for her to find. "I've made mistakes," she started, her voice trembling. "I know that. But you can't just leave me with nothing after everything we've been through." "Everything we've been through," I repeated, leaning forward, my voice sharp. "Evelyn, the moment you decided to betray me, you lost any claim to the life we built together. I've protected what's mine, and you're not getting a single piece of it." Her face twisted with frustration. "I loved you," she said, her voice breaking. "But you shut me out. You made me feel invisible." I shook my head, staring her down. "Don't blame me for your choices. You could have talked to me. You could have fought for us. But instead, you lied. You cheated. You did it for months without a second thought. You don't get to play the victim now." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I wasn't moved. Those tears weren't for me. They were for herself, for the life she thought she could still salvage. "What do you want from me?" she whispered, her voice small and defeated. I stood up, towering over her. "I don't want anything from you, Evelyn. I've already got what I want. You're out of my life, and I'm keeping everything I've worked for. You've lost." She looked up at me, her face a mixture of anger and sorrow, but she knew it was over. There was nothing left for her here. No more cards to play, no more lies to spin. She stood up, wiping her eyes, and without another word, walked out of the house for the last time. I watched her go, feeling nothing but cold satisfaction. The woman who had once been my wife was now a stranger, leaving behind nothing but the wreckage of her own choices. And just like that, she was gone. The door closed behind her with a soft click, and just like that, 27 years of marriage ended in silence. The house, once filled with her presence, felt bigger now, emptier, but in a good way. No more pretending, no more lies hanging in the air. I was free, and so was she, though I had a feeling her version of freedom would feel more like a cage once reality fully set in. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at the door. The weight of everything we'd been through over the past few months settled in, but instead of sadness, I felt something else entirely. Relief. The storm had passed. I had survived. More than that, I had won. The Evelyn who walked out that door wasn't the same woman I had once built a life with, and that was fine by me. But I wasn't quite done yet. I still had one more card to play, one final move that would ensure Evelyn never forgot the price of her betrayal. The following morning, I made my last visit to the lawyer's office. This time, I wasn't finalizing assets or securing my financial future. This was personal. When I arrived, Thorne greeted me with his usual cool professionalism, though I could tell he was curious about why I'd called this last-minute meeting. We sat in his office, the sun streaming through the large windows as I explained the final part of my plan. "I want to give her something," I said, leaning back in my chair. "Not money, nothing she can use to crawl out of the mess she's made. I want to give her a lesson." Thorne raised an eyebrow. "A lesson?" I nodded, smiling faintly. "Exactly. She's still convinced she can manipulate her way out of this, that somehow she can recover and come out on top. I want to make sure she understands fully just how deep she has sunk." Thorne listened carefully as I outlined the details. When I was done, he gave a low whistle, clearly impressed. "I have to hand it to you," he said. "That's thorough. Cold, but thorough." "That's the point," I replied, standing up. "It's not about being kind. It's about making sure she understands the consequences of her choices." The next few days went by quietly. I went back to work, focused on the future, and waited for the final part of my plan to unfold. I had no intention of dragging things out, no long-winded battle in court, no drawn-out negotiations. Evelyn would receive her gift soon enough, and once she did, that would be the end of it. The day came sooner than I expected. I got a text from Thorne just before noon on Friday, simple and to the point. Delivered. I smiled. knowing that in a few hours Evelyn's world would shift in a way she hadn't anticipated. Precisely at 3 p.m., a courier arrived at Madeline's house, where Evelyn had been staying. She was probably expecting some legal documents, maybe even a settlement offer. Anything that would indicate she still had some control over the situation. But instead, when she opened the package, she found something far worse. Inside the box was a single piece of paper, along with a flash drive. The paper was a letter from me, simple and direct. Evelyn, you lost. This is your reality now. Watch the video. You'll understand everything soon. I could imagine her confusion as she stared at the flash drive, trying to figure out what kind of game I was playing. But curiosity would get the better of her. I knew it would. She would plug it into her laptop and open the video file. There on the screen, she would find footage. Footage of her and Adrian, every meeting, every hotel rendezvous, every intimate moment they thought was hidden, captured by security cameras Fletcher had installed without their knowledge. There was no sound, no commentary, just raw, undeniable evidence of her infidelity laid bare for her to see. But that wasn't the worst part. At the end of the video, there was a timestamp and a location. Adrian's new address, one he hadn't told her about. I had tracked him down after he skipped town, found out where he was hiding, and made sure she knew exactly where to find him. Along with the address was a simple message. You're not the only one he's been lying to. Evelyn thought she had been betrayed by just me. She thought Adrian was her way out, her safety net. But the reality was much darker. Adrian had been playing her, just like he had played me all those years ago. He wasn't just broke. He was running a game on her, stringing her along with empty promises while he lined up other women in other cities, preparing to cut her off the moment things got too complicated. That was the final blow, the one that would destroy whatever hope she had left. I didn't need to see her reaction to know how it played out. I could imagine it. Shock, anger, betrayal, hitting her all at once as she realized she had been outplayed at every turn. She had gambled everything and lost. Adrian was gone. Her old life was gone. Now all she had left was the cold, hard truth staring her in the face. By the time the sun set that evening, Evelyn would be standing alone in the ruins of the life she thought she could rebuild. She had walked away from everything, and now there was no one left to help her pick up the pieces. The next morning, I woke up to a quiet house, peaceful and still. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. I poured myself a cup of coffee and walked out to the patio. Sitting down in the early morning light, I could feel the weight of everything that had happened still there, but lighter now, easier to bear. Evelyn was out of my life. The chapter that had been dragging me down was finally closed. I had learned something from all this, not just about Evelyn or Adrian or betrayal, but about myself, about what I was willing to fight for and what I was willing to let go of. I wasn't angry anymore, not even bitter. In the end, I realized that the real victory wasn't in revenge, wasn't in watching Evelyn's world fall apart, though there was certainly satisfaction in that. The real victory was in walking away, knowing I had survived, knowing I had won, but more importantly, knowing I was finally free. And that, in the end, was all I ever really needed. The game was over, and I had won.